Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Alex, and today I just wanted to start off by giving a brief introduction about what this channel will be about. It's going to revolve mostly around true crime, but I do want to throw in conspiracies, horror, urban legends, things like that. With all of that being said, I do want to go ahead and jump straight into the case that I'm talking about today, which is going to be about Junko Furuta. The case is also known as the concrete encased high school girl murder case. It took place in Japan. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old Japanese girl who was born in Masato, Japan on November 22nd of 1971. As a teenager, Junko attended high school and she made really good grades. Junko didn't drink or smoke. She lived with her parents, her older brother, and her younger brother. They all said that she was a very strong-willed person and she didn't do anything that she didn't want to do. She wasn't very easily influenced whatsoever. She was said to be very popular, very pretty, and she was preparing for her next step in life. She was working a part-time job and she was just about to graduate from high school, and then she was going to make her part-time job her full-time job. The whole case really started whenever one of her classmates, Hiroshi Miyano, asked Junko if she wanted to go on a date with him, but those feelings weren't reciprocated by Junko, so she denied him. However, Miyano had ties to the Yakuza, and he had never been denied by any girl before because they feared him. If you don't know, the Yakuza is a gang in Japan that's sort of like the mafia, if you know what that is. And since Junko denied going out with Hiroshi, it made him very, very angry. He wanted to retaliate and basically get revenge on her for denying him. Then on November 25th of 1988, Miyano and his friend Shinji were out roaming the town of Masato, and they had intentions of robbing and raping a young woman. And that is when, around 8:30 p.m., they spotted Junko Furuta on her bike riding home from her part-time job. She had just finished up her shift, and Hiroshi Miyano gave Shinji the orders to kick Furuta off of her bicycle. And so Shinji followed the orders. He kicked her off her bike and immediately fled the scene, leaving Miyano there, when he then acted as an innocent bystander to the whole incident and told Junko that he would walk her home and get her home safely. Junko noticed him as being the boy that she denied, but didn't think anything of it, agreed to let him walk her home so that way she could get home safely. But Furuta was unaware that Miyano was actually leading her to a nearby warehouse, and this is where he revealed his ties to the Yakuza. Miyano then threatened to kill Junko while he raped her at the warehouse. He then took her to a nearby hotel where he raped her again, and from that hotel is where Miyano called Shinji and his other friend Joe and Yashuzi. He bragged to them about what he had done to Junko, and that is when Joe reportedly asked Hiroshi if they could keep Junko around so that way they could all have a turn at doing what he had already done to her at that point. This group had a history of gang rape, and they had just previously raped and kidnapped another girl, though they released her soon afterwards. Unfortunately, Junko wasn't as lucky, because then around 3 a.m., Miyano took Furuta to a nearby park where Shinji, Joe, and Yashuzi were waiting for him. Hiroshi gave the orders to Shinji and Joe and Yashuzi to go through her book bag that she had with her, and they found a notebook that had her address on it. They then threatened to have her whole family killed by the Yakuza if she tried to escape them. And she was very easily overpowered by these 4 boys. She was then taken to one of these boys' houses. I found conflicting information whether it was Shinji's parents' house or Hiroshi Miyano's parents' house, but most of what I found said that it was Miyano's parents' house, so that's what I'll be going with for the video. So they took her back to his house with his parents, and that's where she was then gang raped by all of the boys. And this soon became a regular spot that these boys met up Just 2 days later, Junko's parents became increasingly concerned about their young daughter who never showed up home from her shift. So they reported to the police that she was missing, and very quickly a massive manhunt started for Junko. But in order to forestall that manhunt from progressing any further, Hiroshi ordered Junko to call her mother on the phone and tell her that she had ran away with some friends and that she was fine and she was happy and she didn't want to be found. So that's what Junko did. And then she had to beg her mother to completely stop the manhunt. So the entire time that she was in captivity with these boys, she knew that there was no one looking for her, that no one was coming to save her. And that's incredibly sad, just to know that there was no hope during the whole entire process of what happened to her. Whenever Hiroshi's parents were around, Furuta was initially acting like one of the boys' girlfriends, but they eventually dropped that act after it became clear that his parents wouldn't say anything. They knew what was happening to this girl in their house. It's actually reported that about 100 people knew about Junko's captivity, but rather did nothing to stop it, or they participated in it themselves. Most of the people who participated were also low-ranking members of the Yakuza who were friends with these 4 boys. Hiroshi's parents actually said that they didn't intervene because they were afraid of their son, and they were afraid of whatever retaliation would come with telling the police what they were doing to this girl. And they said that they didn't actually know to the extent of what was happening to her. But to me, there's absolutely no way that she was being so brutally tortured in that house, and they had no idea. There's just not any plausible way that that could happen. Furuta was held in captivity at the Miyano's house for 44 days. During that time, she was abused, raped, and tortured repetitively. Now, I do want to stop here and go ahead and just say that this next part is very graphic, and it's detailed about what happened to Furuta while in captivity. If that's not something you're interested in listening to, or something that's just too hard to listen to, I'm going to put a timestamp on the video so that way you can skip forward and straight past it. I'm going to be reading a list of things that they did to her while in captivity, so if I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing. A brief account of the tortures that were inflicted upon her. She was reportedly raped over 400 times. She was beaten. She was starved. They hung her body from the ceiling and used her as a punching bag. They dropped barbells on her stomach and her legs and arms and just all over her body. They forced her to eat live cockroaches. They forced her to drink her own urine and eat her own feces. They forced her to masturbate in front of them. They set off fireworks inside of her mouth, ears, vagina, and anus. They mutilated her vagina. They burnt her eyelids with hot wax. They completely tore off her left nipple with a pair of pliers, and they also, in addition, pierced her nipples with sewing needles. They set her on fire and forced her to sleep in freezing conditions. In the beginning of December, Furuta actually attempted to call the police, but before she could even get anything out, Miyano caught her. When the police eventually phoned back, Miyano actually informed them that it was an accident and that it was a mistake, that nothing was happening, everything was okay. So as a punishment for Junko trying to call the police, they doused her legs in gasoline and set them on fire. They also sodomized her with a large bottle, which caused severe internal bleeding, and she went into convulsions. And during the trial, the boy said that they thought she was faking the seizures, so they actually set her on fire again. Unfortunately, Junko did survive those injuries and was continued to be raped and tortured. Furuta actually asked her captors so many times to just kill her and to get it over with already, but that's not what they wanted to do. They were having fun, which is disgusting, but that's what they were doing. They forced her to sleep outside on the patio of the house, which it was December at that time, and in Japan in December it's extremely cold. And they also forced her to sleep in a freezer, which they locked her inside of. One of the boys who kidnapped Furuta actually said in court that her legs and her arms were damaged so badly that it took her over an hour to get all the way downstairs to use the restroom and an hour to get back upstairs. And due to the severity of the torture that she endured, she eventually lost control of her bladder and her bowels, which she was beaten for if she soiled the carpets at all. And at that point, she was also unable to consume water or food, and if she did, her body rejected it and she would throw up, and she was also beaten for that as well. The brutality of these attacks, they drastically altered her features. Her face was so swollen that you couldn't even make out who she was by looking at her. It was also reported that her body was so crippled to a point that she was actually giving off a rotting smell, which turned the boys off from her, and it made them lose sexual interest. So these boys decided that they were going to kidnap a new girl to have fun with. So just like Furuta, there was a 19-year-old woman who was on her way home from work when they kidnapped and raped her. But if I do recall correctly, they actually released that woman. And at some point during Furuta's captivity, some of the people who contributed to her abuse were actually identified. Two of those people included, forgive me if I say the names wrong, it's kind of hard to pronounce. They included Tetsuya and Koichi, who were actually charged with her rape after DNA evidence was found on the victim's body. Koichi said that he was bullied into raping Furuta with these boys. And after he left the Miyano's residence, he actually told his brother about what happened, which then he reported to his parents. His parents then contacted the police, so 2 police officers were dispatched out to Miyano's house, which is where they were informed by his parents that there was no girl inside, and his parents invited them in and told them they can come in and they can look if they wanted to. So these 2 officers declined the invitation in, believing that the invitation in itself was enough to prove that there was nothing going on. Both of those officers actually faced considerable backlash for that. At that point, Furuta's whole ordeal would have only lasted 16 days, and she would recover from her injuries. But due to them failing to follow policy, her captivity lasted 44 days, and she passed away. Those 2 police officers were actually fired and released from duty. Somehow, this young woman, who was incredibly strong, managed to survive until January 4th of 1989. And on that particular day, they challenged Furuta to a game of mahjong, which it was said that she won the game, which is what set off the rage in the boys to beat her. The boys beat her with an iron rod. They kicked her and they punched her. They placed 2 short candles on her eyelids and let the hot wax burn her eyelids. They made her stand up while they struck her feet with a swinging stick. And at that point, she fell onto a stereo and collapsed into convulsions once again. Since she was bleeding so profusely and they were beating her to that extent, all of the old wounds that she had from being beaten before had reopened, and there was pus and blood everywhere. And instead of stopping at that point, the boys actually wrapped their hands in plastic bags and duct taped them and continued to beat her. They dropped an iron exercise ball on her stomach and then doused her legs, stomach, face, hands, everything in lighter fluid, and then set her on fire once again. It was said that Furuta actually desperately made several attempts to put that fire out, but gradually she became unresponsive. The whole attack in itself reportedly lasted for 2 whole hours. So they spent 2 hours doing that to that girl. And then again, it comes back to the parents saying that they had no idea that it was that severe. How do you not know that that's happening in your household and that your kids are doing that? It just doesn't make absolutely any sense to me. Eventually, Furuta actually succumbed to those injuries and she died that day. But these boys didn't actually think she was dead because she became unresponsive quite often from how bad they would beat her. They just thought that she would wake up and they could do it again. But she did not wake up, and they didn't realize she was dead till about 24 hours later. At that point, Hiroshi called his brother and let him know what happened. So Hiroshi's brother came, they wrapped her body in blankets, put her into a travel bag, and then inside of a 55-gallon drum that was full of wet cement. And these boys would have probably gotten away with the murder if it wasn't for Hiroshi Miyano and Joe being arrested on January 23rd. They were actually arrested for the gang rape of the 19-year-old woman who they kidnapped while Junko was in captivity and released. On March 29th, 2 police officers were investigating these 2 boys because they had found women's underwear at the Miyano's residence. And during the interrogation, one of the investigators led Miyano to believe that they knew something about a murder. And Miyano was thinking Junko Furuta because they had just killed this girl. And initially, the police were really confused about what he was talking about because the murder that they were talking about, trying to get him to confess to, was actually a double murder of a young woman and her son. That murder occurred 9 days prior to Furuta's abduction. That case actually remains unsolved to this day. I couldn't find any more information on that double murder. All I found was that it's still unsolved. And the following day, the police found Junko Furuta's body inside the drum. She was identified via fingerprints, again because her features were so unrecognizable that they couldn't determine if it was her or not by looking at her. And then on April 1st of 1989, Joe was arrested for another sexual assault, and then he was subsequently re-arrested for the murder. And then the arrest of Yoshuzi, Shinji, and Miyano's brother quickly followed after that. Despite the brutality of the crime that they committed, their identities were actually all sealed because they were considered to be juveniles at the time of the murder. All of the boys were under the age of 18. But a journalist in Japan found out these boys' identities and released them. They stated that given the severity of the crime, these boys shouldn't be allowed anonymity. All 4 of these boys pleaded guilty to committing bodily injury that resulted in death other than murder. In July of 1990, Hiroshi Miyano was sentenced to 17 years by a lower court for the murder of Furuta. He was known to be the leader of that group, so he did get the most time. He actually tried to appeal his sentence later on in Tokyo High Court, but the judge actually sentenced him to 3 additional years in prison, which put him at a total of 20 years that he served, so he almost served a life sentence. Miyano's parents actually sent Furuta's parents 50 million yen or 425,000 US dollars after selling their family home, and I guess that was for pain and suffering, which there's no amount of money that can make up for what their son did. Miyano was then denied parole in 2004. He was then eventually released once his sentence ended, and then in January of 2013, Miyano was rearrested due to fraud, but they had insufficient amounts of evidence against him, so he was released without serving any time. Shinji was sentenced to a 4 to 6 year sentence. It was upped to a 5 to 9 year sentence whenever he tried to appeal it in the high court as well. The same judge who ordered Miyano to have more time did the same for Shinji. After Shinji's release, he moved back in with his mother and has reportedly never worked since then. Shuzi was originally sentenced 3 to 4 years in prison, but received an upgraded sentence of 5 to 7 years. After he was released from prison, he went on to marry a Romanian woman, and there's not much more about him. And then Joe, the last of the 4 boys, was sentenced to 8 years in a juvenile prison. He was then released in August of 1999. After his release, it was said that he boasted about what he had done to Furuta. And then in July of 2004, he was rearrested for the assault of an acquaintance that he thought his girlfriend may have been involved with. Joe tracked down this man and beat him, and then he drove him to his mother's bar, where he then continued to beat him for an additional 4 hours. During the beating, Joe threatened to kill the man over and over again, saying that he had killed before and he knew exactly how to get away with it. And for that assault, he was sentenced 7 years in prison, and he has since then been released. Joe's mother actually vandalized Furuta's grave, stating that Furuta had ruined her son's life, but her son partaked in taking Furuta's life. She didn't ask for that. It was also reported that Joe ran through his father's savings, which was actually meant for the Furuta family. But instead of them receiving that compensation, Joe bought luxury items and a lot of other things. He just spent all of the money. These sentences were seen as far too light by majority of the public, and I definitely think that those sentences were extremely light for the brutality of the case and what they actually did to her. In the court, hearing the details about what happened to Furuta, one of the spectators in the gallery actually fainted, and Furuta's mother had a mental breakdown, and later she actually required psychiatric treatment after going through the trial. At Junko's funeral, she was presented with her high school diploma and also the uniform that she would have received once she became a full-time employee at her part-time job. Her friends made comments that they actually did graduate together. All in all, Junko's funeral was said to be very peaceful and very, very nice. But that is the end of the case and all of the information that I was able to find on it. I really do hope that you guys enjoy watching this video. I did put a lot of time into it. They will get increasingly better as I go and I progress and I get more comfortable in front of the camera. But I do want to say thank you again for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more content like this.